Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing a little bit of shop talk, a little bit of crop talk, and a lot of different things in between. Before we get too far along, make sure you like the video and leave a comment down below. It is one of the easiest and cheapest ways you can support the channel. So go down there real quick, smash that thumbs up, and leave me a comment. Say hi, ask a question, whatever you feel like. I am tremendously appreciative of all of you tuning in and continuously watching the channel. So thank you very much. Ooh, before I completely forget, I am also laying the groundwork right now for some merch for the channel. It is going to be some sweet gear, so make sure you're following us on Instagram and Facebook. That way you don't miss out when we drop it. Let me tell you guys something. It is so hot outside today here in Central Illinois. Well, actually, it's been pretty hot for the last 2 or 3 days. I spent about 3 hours yesterday out in the soybean fields taking tissue samples. That way we can get a little bit of a nutrient analysis from our plants. And let's just say, by the time I was done for the day, you could have wrung the sweat out of my shirt and filled up a bucket. I know that's gross, but that's just how hot and sticky it is outside right now. Absolutely miserable day to be working outside, but what's bad for us is good for the plants. I'm just gonna go ahead and disappoint you all right now. None of that new fancy John Deere equipment's here at our farm yet. It's all been delivered to the dealership. It's just not set up, so we haven't taken delivery to our farm. Don't worry though. In just a few short weeks, we'll have some nice new pieces of equipment here in the barn to show off to all of you. Not that John Deere equipment really needs showing off. I mean, look at that green and yellow. Self-advertising. Whew, it is so pretty. Water hemp will literally grow anywhere. All over the place. In other news, we finally took some initial steps towards beginning our harvest prep work. We drug our oldest draper out of the barn. Probably in the next week or two, we're going to give it a look over, see what it needs to be running here in 4 or 5 weeks. Won't be too long before we're cutting beans. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. We also won't have that much maintenance to do here before we get out and harvest because a lot of our equipment's going to be new this year. This draper right here, 630 FD, is going to be our oldest implement we're running this year. And I think it's about 8 or 9 years old. It's done a tremendous job cutting beans for us in that short amount of time, been extremely reliable. Those of you who were here at the beginning of last fall might remember me replacing the cutter bars on both our drapers. And if my memory serves me correctly, I think the weather was about as miserable as it is today. To be completely fair though, I'm not in the best of shape right now, so I have an added layer of insulation on me, which does not help when it's this warm outside. We've also started piling some lime over the last 2 weeks. Just a little pile right there. The pile definitely looks a little bit more sizable when you're up close and personal. Just shooting from the hip here, I'd say this is about 150 tons of agricultural limestone. It's only maybe 10%, if not less than 10% of what we're going to need this fall to use as a soil amendment. This product will be applied to reduce the acidity of our soil. I'm not really going to talk about it today, I just wanted to show you the pile. We'll cover it later on and really talk in depth about how it works out on our farm and why it's so important. The trucking guy is going to be pretty busy here over the next month. We need about 1,800 more tons of lime, which is about 90 loads. I forgot to mention that we have been in the initial stages of considering trading this 630 FD for the newest series, I don't know the name, but a 35-foot flex draper. The massive obstacle we're running into though, like a lot of other pieces of equipment and the newest stuff we've ordered, is that our local John Deere dealership is waiting on 25 new drapers to be delivered before this harvest. If I were a betting man, I'd be willing to place my money that every farmer in Central Illinois, or at least the southern part of that region, will be cutting soybeans here in 5 to 6 weeks. For this deal to work financially for us and for our John Deere dealership, they'd need to move this 630 FD to the new customer before we got the new head, and we just can't afford to let it go unless we'd have a new one on the way. And it's not looking like there'll be any here for us to use. The boss came to check on me. He's getting a little antsy today. His nerves today are pretty easy to comprehend. At 11 a.m. Central, the USDA is releasing another WASDE report, a world supply and demand. I've mentioned a million times, like beating a dead horse, how important supply and demand of grains are to the overall price. Really, that's just simple economics in about every industry. Supply and demand are one of the biggest factors for the price of that commodity. It's incredibly hard to predict what these numbers are going to be. No one really has a good crystal ball to see what the USDA is going to come out with in terms of final numbers. Global consumption of grains could be really high. They could come out low. US exports could come out low. There's all sorts of different things that can affect this. Then you go and exponentiate the difficulty of this prediction by adding in the projected yields across the country? That is really the great question this year. No one knows exactly what the yields are doing. By the time you account for the Western Corn Belt and their struggles, you balance out the Eastern Corn Belt and their successes, it's really hard to tell where the yield's going to be at. Are we going to be at the trendline yield, above the trendline yield, or below? Now, as a farmer, you're almost always hoping for below the trendline yield because that should tick those prices higher. One of the really unfortunate truths about farming is that what's bad for farmers across the country is really good for you. If they have a bad crop and you have a good crop, you're going to be financially benefited. And the opposite is also true. I know that some of you aren't super interested in the marketing side of farming, but for those who are, we are going to kind of follow it a little bit. It won't take long. If you're not interested, just skip ahead like 2 minutes or 1 minute and 30 seconds. I don't know. Sometimes I can be a little long-winded if you didn't know. This right here is the December 2021 corn futures contract. This is what we're going to be watching because it is the new crop corn contract. The December 2021 corn contract, also called ZCZ 2021, is essentially the new crop corn contract that represents all of the corn that's growing out in the fields right now for this next marketing year. Not the old crop corn that's still in bins, which there's not very much left of. What's really important about this contract is it shows our supply and demand going forward and really the price sentiment for that. Now the report is due out any minute. We've been trading in this range pretty much all morning. This is the 1 minute chart, and that is about the 554-ish range. Once the report comes out, you will recognize pretty quickly how the market reacts. It comes out at 11 a.m. and it is 11 a.m. So let's see what happens. All right, it's a little bit past 11 and let's see how the market's reacted. Oh, wow. Got about a 30-cent gain there. We were at 554-ish and we're at 581 right now. So we're actually about 4 minutes after the report because I have it set so each one of these lines is 1 minute. A 25-cent jump here on new crop corn is massive. On a 200 bushel corn crop, 25 cents is $50 an acre. If you have 1,000 acres of corn, that's $50,000. It's not a laughing matter. Marketing is so important and so crucial to a farming operation. Let's dive into the numbers really quick. This chart right here is courtesy of Karen Braun on Twitter. She has a lot of great resources for markets and agricultural in general, so give her a follow if you're interested in this type of stuff. The funny fact about Twitter is a lot of times you can get this data faster on there than you can by actually going to the USDA website and finding it yourself. This right here is the meat and potatoes of a report. The two essential numbers to compare are these right here. The trade, which was the futures market as a whole, was predicting 177.6 bushels an acre production projected yield. However, the National Survey System, I'm not actually sure what that stands for, they came out with a number of 174.6, which is 3 bushels lower than what the trade was expecting. And you come over to this column, which is total production, that is 250 million bushel difference. Just picture 250 million bushels, and you'll see how drastic of a change that is. Percentage-wise, it's not massive because we do produce almost 15 billion bushels of corn, which is impressive within itself. What's more significant, though, is compared to July, we are about 400 million bushels shy of where we are this time last month. The numbers on the soybean side aren't near as drastic. 0.4 of a bushel really isn't that large of a decrease. That is still a bullish number. The price of soybeans is up about 18 cents per bushel right now. An 18-cent move in soybeans is nothing like an 18-cent move in corn. 18 cents in soybeans right now is a little bit more of a percent of an increase. 18 cents in corn, though, is a little bit over 3%. One last quick look at the corn market. We're trading at 584.5 right now, down a little bit from the high, still floating about 30 cents up. So it's a pretty significant move in the corn market, and it has a big impact on new crop corn and farmers' profitability. Some of you may disagree, but I personally think that grain marketing is the hardest part about farming. A lot of people are tremendous farmers. They make great agronomic and timely decisions for their crops. They produce good yields. You can grow all the crops in the world, but if you can't capture the highest peak of the market or the highest percentile of the market in terms of price, you can't be as profitable as some other people. And that's why marketing really sets apart good farmers from great farmers. Now, I'm not going to say we're perfect by any means in terms of our marketing ability. We have a lot of falls and shortcomings, but there's a lot to be learned by following this stuff and being a student of the markets. Even with these above average commodity prices right now, marketing is as important as ever. Not only are grain prices above average, fertilizer and other input expenses has followed suit, and they are way up as well. If you want to capture the most on your farm ground this year and every other year, you have to make the right calls and you have to be a winner at the marketing game, which isn't easy to do. If you have any questions or want to leave any input on this type of stuff, make sure you drop a comment down below. We're going to venture out into some of our earliest planted fields of soybeans and kind of get an idea of how our crop looks. Now, I warned you earlier, it's extremely hot, very humid today. I think the heat index is close to 110 degrees. So we're gonna have to do some very necessary things to get by. Sunglasses are also a necessity today. If you could all say a quick prayer for me that I make it back out of the soybean field, that'd be great. Who knows what's gonna happen with this heat? I may not make it very far. Also, make sure you stay tuned to the video. I got something really neat I'm gonna show you here in a couple minutes. This field we're in right now are Pioneer 31 A95 extend-only soybeans. They were the first field we planted on April 5th, which seems like ages ago at this point, and they are also the shortest season bean we have. So they will definitely be the first thing we harvest. I'm willing to bet thousands of dollars on that one. By no means has this growing season been a cakewalk for this field of soybeans. They saw multiple mornings of near freezing temperatures, they've survived multiple hailstorms, and they've had their fair share of wind out here. That really goes to show the vigor of most modern soybean varieties. They are bred so much tougher than they were decades ago, and all of those different seed treatments we layer on them really help protect them from other environmental stresses and disease pressure. These beans look really good. There's no shortage of pods when you consider the overall stand we have out in this field or the plant population. The density of the individual plants has a lot to do with the number of pods. A plant with less competition around it is going to put on more pods. These beans have a ton of potential. This plant right here, there's a 4-bean pod. There's another 4-bean pod. A 4-bean pod is usually a pretty good indicator of a high yielding environment. Not every plant's like that, and obviously you have areas where 2-bean pods are on there. In terms of the growth stage or the reproductive stage of these soybeans, I'm gonna peg them at R6. R6 is classified by one of the pods on the top 4 nodes having a green seed that fills out the pod completely. I don't even have to open these up to see that it's R6 just because the density of that pod indicates that it's full of seed. The next stage, which is R7, is really the sign of maturity beginning. That would be when any pod on the plant reaches that brown final color. These pods are definitely developing a darker color, which means they're very far along. I think R7 is right around the corner, but they're not quite there yet. There's still a lot of filling out to be done in this field. A lot of yield is still on the table. 4-bean pods aren't really anything incredibly special or unique by any means. However, you can find a 5-bean pod out in the field, or at least I've been told that. I've never seen one with my own eyes, but supposedly it is possible. And I think if you have 5-bean pods out in the field, you're in great shape. I've scouted a lot of beans on my time on the farm, and I've never once seen those. The crucial part about this growth stage of soybeans and into maturity is how well they fill out these pods or how much weight they pack into each seed. What is really important for soybeans versus corn is that they get rains in August. A good rainfall in August is usually coined the $1 million rain because it can have a massive impact on yields in soybeans. Last year we didn't have any rain from mid-July to about September, end of September, so it was essentially a drought from that period, and I think we left probably 10 bushels of beans on the table. I can't necessarily complain about our soybean yields last year. We were kind of in that 70 to 80 bushel range. However, if we could have just gotten one small, measly little 1-inch rain in August, we probably would have been looking at 80 to 90 bushel beans. That's how important that August moisture is. These soybeans cannot put their roots down very far, so once that topsoil is dry, they're in trouble. I really try not to guess any solid numbers for soybean yields because you can really get your heart broken. I like to set the bar low. I think out in this field we're looking at a minimum of 70 bushel beans, which would be tremendous, especially given the prices. Now, of course, anything is possible. We could see lower than 70, but I am optimistic that's not going to happen. One thing that has my confidence really high is I see next to no foliar diseases or insect feeding on our leaves out here. Our fungicide and insecticide is definitely doing its job, and that's why we spray it every year. There is one disease I'm seeing out here which fungicide does not protect against and which you never want to see, that fungal pathogen being sudden death syndrome. This soil-borne pathogen is incredibly hard to predict and also hard to prevent with post-applications. The interveinal necrosis on this leaf is a pretty good indicator of sudden death syndrome. It does share some similarities to brown stem rot. The only guaranteed way, or at least somewhat guaranteed ways to prevent against this disease are very premium seed treatments. Alevo being one of them, Saltro being another. We do have a trial on one of our farms where we have some Alevo on half the planter. We don't have anything out here. Some soybean varieties, and I have no idea about these 31A95s, have a better natural resistance against sudden death syndrome. This is just one plant here though, and all around I don't see that many. You hate to lose one to sudden death syndrome. It's not the end of the world though. To look at management of SDS in a different lens, we're on day 120, give or take, of this growing season, and this is something that if you want to get rid of, It needs to be done on day one. So there's nothing we can do at this point in time to come back and alleviate this problem. If we see a lot of it in a field, we really need to note that down somewhere and say, okay, 2 years from now when we rotate back to soybeans after the falling corn crop, we probably should consider one of those seed treatments to prevent against sudden death syndrome. If it spreads into larger portions of the field, which isn't really common in this area, but it is in northern Illinois, you can lose a lot of money, and I mean a lot of money from SDS. I spotted some water hemp. Why'd I walk this way? Got like 6 of them that broke through. It's really unfortunate when I see water hemp because I hate it so much that I'm almost morally obligated to walk over here and rip it out and make sure it's dead. Every female plant you kill though, you're saving yourself about 200,000 plus offspring. One of the worst parts about water hemp is that if you throw it on the ground and there's any bit of root touching, it will actually re-root within the next week and start growing again. So I like to make sure it's really dead. For the sake of comparison and to keep things fair, we're out in a field of Asgrow 38XF1 XtendFlex beans. I don't have any skin in the game in the Corteva versus Bayer versus all the other seed companies game. However, these XtendFlex beans look phenomenal. Looks can be deceiving, but you gotta see these beans. I think the potential sky high. We'll bend them over and take a look. I guess like a soybean doctor. Look at the pod count on these. Recall what those 3-1 Pioneer beans looked like, and look at these 3-8 XtendFlex beans. Wow, there's so many pods, and they aren't planted any thinner than that last field. Just a tremendous quantity of pods. I have 2 points to make to defend all of our other beans. One, some varieties of soybeans, and maybe these included, can be very showy. They can have a lot of looks to them, a lot of prowess, but at the end of the day, not yield anymore. Like I said, you don't want to get your hopes up with soybeans. They can really break your heart. And secondly, this field inherently has a tremendous advantage versus the previous field for this growing season. It has a sandier subsoil. It's been extremely wet through July. It's hurt a lot of our beans. A field like this, though, thrives when there's a lot of moisture. All of these large rainfalls have kept this ground saturated. These beans have never hurt for moisture, where a lot of seasons they typically do. I think that's going to set this field up to be a higher yield environment this year. But in most years, the previous field we were in, you take it any day of the week over this one. That's darker ground. This is lighter, usually drier. That holds its moisture better. On a very moist growing season like we've had, this is the kind of ground you want. I guess I should mention the growth stage of these beans. Pretty much the same as those 3-1s. These are 3-8 planted the same day on the later side of the group 3, so they will mature probably a week, maybe 10 days later than that, even though they both went in the ground on the 5th of April. That's just the difference between maturity groups. If I had half a brain, I would have brought some of the pods over to compare from the last field. These just aren't quite as filled out. Some of them are still kind of flat. They're pretty much R6 though. Both fields, maybe 5 weeks left, possibly 6. I'm really excited to harvest these XtendFlex beans. Let's just face the music. Soybean yields are cool and all, although they're kind of erratic and hard to predict. But at the end of the day, if you're at a coffee shop and you're bragging, you're talking about corn yields. It's all about who has the biggest number, the longest year. And if you want to have a measuring contest, you do that in a corn crop. And let's be honest, corn is king, it was king, it always has been king. Everyone loves to talk and brag about corn. 100 bushel beans, that's cool. 300 bushel corn, heck yeah. I'd like to take a little step back real quick and maybe make a few comments. I've been rather temperamental with my yield predictions all year for both corn and soybeans. At one point in time, June, I was like, record yields, oh my gosh, monster crop. Then all this rain, I was like, average yield, maybe a little bit above average. Then I was like, it's actually better than that. Oh, record crop. Oh, back to average, maybe below average. And then I'm kind of somewhere in between average to above average, although I haven't walked out here and actually quantified the yields of this corn. You can put a number or a much closer estimate on corn production than you can with soybeans. There is actually a valid and simple mathematical way to calculate yield potential on corn based on kernels and population. Now soybeans, you can do that too, but it's just so much work. You have to take a hula hoop out there, get like 3 square feet, count off the pods, do this, that, weigh every pod, weigh every seed. It's just extremely difficult to do. Corn is easier. We're going to take a look at our corn right here. From the outside row, there's no denying that our corn looks really good. Now I'm going to warn you, the outside row has no competition. This is what I call the Instagram row. This is where you get your Instagram picture or your Facebook picture. Say, hey, look how good our corn is. Here, watch. I'll give you a perfect example of how to stage this. This here right here, that looks pretty good. Pop it open a little bit. These outside rows are always something else. Quite the illusion. It's all about staging the picture here. You pick the most impressive ears you can find, maybe rip a couple leaves off, make it look even more prominent, showcase those, and then all you gotta do now is pose. Oh, look at this corn I found in the middle of the field. Totally not the outside row. Hashtag God's country, hashtag 300 bushel corn, hashtag better farmer than you, hashtag big time operator. See, that's really all there is to it. Just find the outside row of corn, make yourself look like a tremendous farmer. Obviously the corn on the outside is going to be better. It's not competing against other rows of corn. It literally gets 2 to 3 times the sunlight because there's no competition right here. If every ear looked like this across the field, this would be 300 bushel corn. We're talking National Corn Growers Association Yield Contest winner. That's not the case. We're gonna walk out in the field and get an actual realistic idea of what our corn looks like. Oh, it is so hot outside right now. Water! I haven't even been out in the field yet. I'm sweating this much just from talking. That just shows you how out of shape I am. All right, let's go. It's important to always remember which way north is. We've trekked about 150 feet off the end row. You usually want to get far away from that to get a more realistic estimate of the yield. Now the first step to estimating yield is to know your population. There are fixed distances to step off depending on your planting population to know how far you get to get the appropriate distance for population. In 30-inch rows, that number is about 17.5 foot. So it's always good to estimate this. I don't have a ruler, so take this with a grain of salt. And I wear about a size 11 shoe, so I would say that 17 steps with my boot directly touching is 17.5 foot. I think that's fair. 2, 3, 4, 5, 16, 17, okay? And that's right there. Now the next step is very simple. We just count the number of plants in between those 2 marks. To count the plant, it has to have a viable ear. So that has a viable ear, but that plant right there does not have a viable ear, so it does not count in the population. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 29, 30. So there's our mark. To get the population for the whole field, you multiply it by 1,000. So we had 30 plants in that strip. That's 30,000 plants per acre. Really not that great considering our target stand was about 34,500. Could just be a bad spot in the field. What is usually recommended to be objective is to take a fixed amount of ears or from a very specific spot. I like to do 3, 6, and 10. It keeps you objective. 1, 2, 3, pull, 2, 3, pull, 2, 3, 4, pull. I'm not even sure if I'm headed the right direction. I sure hope so, because it is really hot. If you don't hear from me again, just know I died out in a cornfield. It's a good place for me to be. Oh, no worries, we made it. Before we do the math on this, I think that my normal method out here, we may have gotten a little bit lucky. Some of these didn't have a plant by them, so they're gonna be a little bit skewed. That's just the nature of sampling like that. Next step is husking them. There's no denying that our 3 ears look pretty good. We know our plant population. Now we just have to estimate how many kernels per ear. We took 3 because we want to get a little bit of a sample size to average out with. The number of rows of corn is always an even number. It always grows in groups of 2. So let's count right here. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, I think. TV timeout, I'm going to count this again. Okay, I counted again. That one is actually 20 around. I really don't think this was a fair one to pull. It might skew my numbers a little bit. I'll take another sample here in a little bit, but we will still go ahead and count this. So it's 20 around. Then we start a couple down from the top and we count how many are in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we're gonna say 40. I can't actually count that high, but it looks like 40. So that's a 20 by 40. That's a very massive ear. You're not normally gonna see that out in a field. At 30,000 population though, it may be possible. Less population usually results in bigger ears. Here's our next ear. It's a little bit smaller. 2, 4, 6, 18 around. I'm gonna say 38 by 18, so another good ear. 2, 4, 6, 16, 18 around, and we're gonna do 18 by 38 again on that one. We're gonna multiply each one individually, add them all up, and divide them by 3. And that makes the average for these 3 ears 722. We'll round down, we'll use 720. Now we multiply that 720 by our population. So we had 30,000, so 30,000, right there, see 30,000, if you can even see that. Multiply that by 720. That gets us a really big number, 21.6 million. The last thing we need to know is a fixed number. That is how many kernels per bushel. There are a few different schools of thought on what number you should use. The conservative value is usually about 90,000. I actually think this year, based on the growing season and the fungicide we applied, it'll actually be closer to 85, if not 80,000. 90,000 is going to give us a much more conservative response. So we're going to divide that 21.6 million by 90,000. We're gonna hit enter, and that is 240 bushel corn right there. As I said though, got kind of lucky with that draw. I'm gonna run out to the other side and do it again and hopefully get something a little more realistic. Oh, we're headed north this time. Into the corn we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we got 34 there, much better stand. Surely I could have found something better today out of all days to do than do yield estimates in corn. It's kind of miserable out here. Let's check them. Boop. It's very noticeable that the area of the field with the thinner stand, the 30,000 plants per acre, has bigger ears than the area with 34,000 plants per acre. That just shows you the flexibility of the ears. Now we're going to count these up and see how that yields. 14 by 36, 14 by 38, and 16 by 35. The average is 532 kernels per year. Now we multiply that by population, which was 34,000. That's an impressive stand given we shoot for 34.5. 18,088,000 divided by 90,000. Gotta be smarter than the phone. That's only 200 bushel corn. So that just goes to show you that this corn right here, better population, smaller ears, did not have as much potential on the north side. On the south side, where I may have just gotten lucky with my ear pull, much better corn. 200 bushels versus 240. It's about a 20% increase from this. This showcases a very important flaw with yield checking out in your field. I picked 2 random arbitrary spots on different sides of the field. I got 2 numbers 20% off from each other. I very easily on that side could have pulled 2 different ears and gotten 250 bushel corn. Likewise on the south side, I could have pulled a couple different ears and gotten 190 bushel corn. It's a very rough number to work off of, so don't take these numbers as gospel. In regards to the reproductive stage of all this corn, I'm assuming it's all the same hybrid. I don't know without looking in the records, and let's be honest, sometimes Dad's records aren't the easiest. He is the corn planter man. A lot of it is R5, which is dent. Once all of the kernels are dented, you are 100% R5. So it's definitely flirting with R5, maybe still R4, which is dough. The big differentiating factor between dent and physiological maturity, 1 is the black layer at the bottom of the kernel that indicates that, and 2, the milk layer in here will completely disappear. As long as you can still see the milk line in the kernel, it's not done growing. For as close as we are to the finish line, we actually have a lot of crucial things left to do for this corn. There's still a lot that can go wrong and a lot that can go right. I'm almost certain that this has the wheels turning in a lot of your mind and a lot of questions coming up. And I completely understand. You're probably thinking, well, you got 200 to 240 bushel corn. What can you complain about that? At the end of the day, we're in the heart of the most important part of the corn growing process, and that is grain fill. Grain fill is the process of assimilating nutrients and starches into each one of these kernels to add weight. To put it simply, a kernel that has half weight versus a kernel that's at its full weight potential is worth a lot less. That's why this process is so crucial, and that's where all of this wet weather and stress really comes into play, especially in regard to our nutrients. All of this corn we planted the 1st to 2nd week of April has accumulated about 2,300 growing degree units, give or take. For 110 to 114 day corn, that puts it right around R5, beginning of R6. What's crucial about R5 to R6 is over 50% of the entire corn nitrogen use goes into place here to fill the grain. Of course, all 3 of your essential macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, are incredibly important, but let's be honest, nitrogen is bar none the most essential for growing a massive corn crop. Nitrogen is fundamental for the production of proteins within the plant and also to put in the ear. Without adequate nitrogen, it cannot stuff the maximum amount of starch into this ear. The biggest issue with this is, compared to P and K, nitrogen is the biggest flight risk. Corn is a glutton for nitrogen, an absolute fiend. When it comes time to fill that ear, it will do whatever possible to extract as much nitrogen from the ground. If it cannot find it there, it will literally cannibalize the rest of the plant to put as much into the ear as possible. Let's be honest, everyone, at the end of the day, the purpose of almost everything alive in Mother Nature is to reproduce. Corn is not any different. Its goal is not to keep the plant alive. It will sacrifice itself to produce the most viable offspring. That viable offspring obviously helps us financially and feeds the world, but when you want to look at it from more of an evolutionary standpoint, that's the way it works. That makes perfect sense, I'm sure. That's all fine and good. It needs to take a little bit of nitrogen. Well, corn uses a little bit more than just a tiny bit of nitrogen. Most estimates put corn's usage at over 1 pound of nitrogen per bushel per acre. In 240 bushel corn crop, that is 240 pounds of nitrogen. That is a lot. We're a few rows into a wetter spot in the cornfield, and it is chocked full of plant cannibalization. All of these lower leaves down here, the stalks included, are starting to brown out. These ears are so hungry for nitrogen that it's willing to jeopardize the entire lower portion of the plant to make that happen. You'll often hear this phenomenon described as firing, the process of the corn browning from bottom to top as it starts to make use of some of this plant tissue. We can see it a lot out here, and that is why I'm really concerned about our corn crop. Our yield count is good right now, but there's still a long way to go. A good metaphorical comparison for a corn plant is a marathon runner. Now, I'm not a marathon runner by any means. I'm sure you can tell. Marathon runners are often very lean. There's not a lot of fat on them. Everything there is designed to reach that finish line, kind of like our corn plants here. Some of you may be able to find flaws in this logic, but my understanding is that marathon runners are not equipped with enough natural energy storage to run the entire 26 miles without supplementing nutrients. If they don't have carbohydrates or some source of energy store to complete the race, they may not have what it takes to finish with a run. They may have to walk, or they may not finish at all. Let's say the same is true for our corn plants. They've completed 90% of the race, but what's 90% if you can't finish the last 10%? It's about the entire thing. As they say, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It doesn't matter how good you did in the first 90%. If you can't finish the last 10%, it's not going to matter. Barring any kind of Armageddon or extreme weather, corn kind of does get a consolation prize. We still will have grain at the end of the day. However, if we want maximum yield potential, it needs all of those nutrients to cross the finish line at full speed, at record pace. And that's the problem we're running into right now and very concerned about, is the amount of nitrogen left in the ground. But Andy, you put 120 pounds of actual in with anhydrous, 100 plus pounds with 32% UAN, and then soybean credits, your diammonium phosphate, you've probably got 270 pounds of nitrogen out there. And I sure do hope and pray that we have a lot of nitrogen left to finish off with our pedal to the metal, but that may not be the case. We're gonna head over to the lab, and by the lab I mean the barn, and by the barn, I mean somewhere a lot cooler than outside because I'm drenched in sweat. And I'm gonna show you guys exactly what we're running into right now. Before I dive in and really explain the case of the missing nitrogen, I really want to offer a disclaimer that this is a gross oversimplification of what's going on out in our fields. Soil sciences and the interaction of nutrients within the soil and also within the environment are very complex topics. There are people with PhDs in this discipline. So I don't want to throw any disrespect to anyone who's an expert in this field. However, I do want to present a very simple, rudimentary explanation for those who really don't understand what's going on. I gave a rather long-winded explanation of the preliminary part of the process I'm about to explain back when we were side dressing our corn. If you haven't seen that video, I'll link it in here somewhere. Go back and watch that. There's also some sweet drone footage of the side dress bar and the John Deere 8400 running. You don't want to miss that. Go back there, watch the tractor run, watch my explanation. This will make a little bit more sense with that added in. I am going to rehash a tiny bit of that information. That way, if you didn't see that or you didn't really gather the information correctly, you'll have somewhat of an understanding of what's going on. Most soil particles can be compared to a piece of paper towel. All of these particles are jammed together in the soil. Water has the ability to adhere to it, so it can maintain moisture. Soil particles are also negatively charged, so positively charged ions can bind to them. Let's say this blue dot represents some kind of positively charged ion. It is binding into the soil. Say that this green also represents some other kind of positively charged ion. Maybe a fertilizer, maybe something not beneficial for the soil. Either way, the negatively charged binding sites on the soil attract positively charged ions and they bind together. Depending on the affinity or the strength of that bond, different ions can take precedence over other competing ions. Either way, it is always a positively charged ion that attaches to the negatively charged sites in the soil. That is why each different class of soil has a cation exchange capacity. Essentially, this is a rating of how many positively charged ions can attach to that soil. A higher cation exchange capacity is usually associated with higher productivity and higher organic matter soils. Lower cation exchange capacity soils usually have lower productivity and less ability to retain fertilizers and nutrients. Even some of the most productive soils in the world with the highest cation exchange capacities have a limit to how much they can hold. If the soil is too saturated with those nutrients, it can still run off. As you see, this soil particle right there could not hold any more of this nutrient, so it dripped off onto the ground. This is representative of what's going on in our soil in a very basic sense. Now let's look at it on a broader scale. Analyzing the soil particles individually is relatively straightforward. When it gets complicated is when we start to look at the soil profile as a whole. Let's just say that this tube right here represents 1 acre of soil and its drainage. This is the entire soil profile, all of its ability to hold nutrients, and how it interacts with the environment. By the time all of our fertilizer is accounted for, we have over 240 pounds of nitrogen in our soil profile. It all starts within reach of our corn plant's roots. For every 1 leaf stage, corn puts on about 2.5 to 2 3/4 inches of roots. The maximum rooting depth of corn is 5 feet. That's pretty tremendous. Now we come in the fall and put on 120 pounds of anhydrous ammonia. Let's represent it with this green dye right here. The analysis of anhydrous ammonia is 8200. It is entirely NH3. When it hits the soil, it interacts with water, gains an extra hydrogen, becomes positively charged, and binds the soil particles. You can see that this green dye is binding with our soil here. The soil is moist, but not completely saturated. There is pore space available, meaning that oxygen can get through it. We put this anhydrous on in the fall, it pretty much all binds with the soil. We then make an additional pass of nitrogen in late spring or early summer using 32% UAN. It is a mixture of both ammonium, which is NH4, and nitrate, which is NO3. What's very important to note is that nitrate is negatively charged, unlike ammonium. It will not bind with the soil profile. It will actually stay in solution in the pore space. This is a problem because nitrate can be easily leached. My mom, bless her soul, just let me use all of her food coloring and she doesn't even know it. Thanks, Mom. Okay, so a majority of our nitrogen is bound to the soil particles. A little bit's in solution. What's the big whoop? Well, this is where things start to get a little bit spicy. As the temperatures warm up and the growing season progresses, there are 2 microbes within the soils. These 2 microbes convert ammonium, the positively charged ion bound to the soil, to nitrite, which is NO2 negative, then to nitrate immediately, which is NO3 with a negative charge as well. Meaning that as the season goes on, our nitrogen is almost guaranteed to be switched to the form which is in soil solution with nothing holding it on to these soil particles. Now in an average year, which I'm going to showcase right now, that's not really a big deal. As we get rainfalls, sure, the nitrogen is going to work its way down in the soil profile. I mean, that's just natural. The corn roots are going to dig deeper down, they're going to scavenge the nutrients out and be able to capture stuff even from the farthest part. 5 foot down is a long way to go when you consider the overall volume of soil. It keeps raining, but never rains in an excessive amount. This is almost the perfect scenario. Sure, we're going to lose a little bit of nitrogen at the end of the day. It is impossible to be perfect when you're dealing with Mother Nature. We're going to retain the majority of that for our crop to use. We're also not going to suffer the stress from our soil being underwater a majority of the time. We reached the end of the growing season. We've had adequate moisture, but not too much. The nitrogen that remains that hasn't been utilized by the plant has worked its way down. However, the plant will be able to accumulate this and use it for its growth, assuming that it needs it. Of the water that made it completely through the soil profile, it only has a minimum amount of dye in it. This represents leaching. Leaching is the process of losing nutrients downward through the soil. As water permeates, it grabs nutrients in solution along with it and heads down with gravity. This is our concern this year, is leaching. Now this is a perfect year, an average year. Let's look at something a little bit more moist. This middle column is going to represent an above average year of rainfall. Kind of what I would say we've had this year. We continuously had excess rainfalls. Look at how fastly, when you have large volumes of water, that nitrogen is capable of permeating through the soil. Especially in the later months of the summer, this is almost free game to go downward. Those microbes have been very busy during the warm months of June and July, converting that ammonium to nitrate. Next thing you know, you get a couple 4-inch rainfalls in July. You get a couple weeks, the soil stays saturated, absorbs a lot of that nitrogen. Here's another 4-inch rain 2 weeks later. That's not good. Here's a 3-inch rain. That's what it's like dealing with Mother Nature. Obviously, you're going to have the damage of the roots being saturated, probably rotting from the lack of oxygen. You're also going to be dealing with the amount of nitrogen you lost. This right here is a prime example of where we're at this year and how we don't really know where to peg our corn yields. We could have enough nitrogen, or we could have lost a lot of it. If we've lost a lot of the nitrogen, that means that we may not have the energy to assimilate all the proteins and carbs into the grain and complete that race at full speed, much like a marathon runner running out of energy on the final mile. Sure, you completed 90% of the growing season and reap whatever rewards there are of that. However, that last 10% can really be the money maker. This right here is a very good indicator of all of the nitrogen we've lost into the soil profile that even the corn roots cannot get to. Not only do they not have the depth to reach it at this point, a lot of times when it's this wet, the corn roots really struggle to grow or retain that many nutrients in the first place because of all those different problems I mentioned: root rot, nutrient availability, and nutrient loss. Not only is this a problem for our crops, it is also a big problem in terms of the environment. Nitrogen and other fertilizers that make it through the soil like that can cause big issues wherever they end up. Large quantities of nitrogen and phosphorus have created a lot of headaches down in the Gulf of Mexico due to all the hypoxia they create by creating a ton of algae, suffocating the ocean of oxygen, and really throwing a wrench into the overall food chain down there. So this is where we are this year. We're above average in moisture. Now let's talk about 2019. 2021 has not been a great growing season by any means. We've had a lot of rainfall. It does not compare though to 2019 for us. This was by far one of the wettest years I've ever experienced in my short time here on the farm. We didn't get our crop planted till mid-May. We didn't finish till mid-June. We replanted 3 or 4 different times. We replanted 4 times in one field alone. It was that wet all season from start to finish. We had a really wet April. The ground stayed saturated the whole time. It kept raining. It kept raining. It kept raining. About the end of April, it kept raining. Are we ever going to get our crop planted? Oh no. Market's going up. It keeps raining. The world's going to go hungry. Oh, we're about to plant. Just kidding. More rain. We get a little bit of corn planted first week of May. It looks pretty good. Rains about 3 inches second week of May. Corn still looks fine. All the beans I planted died. Had to replant about half of them. Okay, here we go. Oh, it finally dries up a little bit. Everything's doing good. And then I call this 10 inches in 10 days. That's 2019 for you. Marty's gonna be pissed at me. And this is what happens when all of your nutrients leach out of the field. You gotta deal with the environmentalists. Not that they're wrong, but they're still not right to deal with. And Marty's kind of the environmentalist in this scenario. I hope this kind of makes you understand how the excessive rainfalls have really hurt our corn crop or have the potential to rob yield from us. Now, there are things you can do to retain nutrients, alleviate these issues, and we do make use of a lot of them. I'm not really going to go into big depth in this video because this was kind of a sky-high view of this problem. It is so much more complicated than that. If you have any questions or comments, make sure you drop them down below. Speaking of excessive rainfall, this must be one of those $1 million rains they speak of. Just spoon feeding our bean crop. It's pretty much been $1 million day for me here on the farm if you round up about $999,000. Come on, baby, 90 bushel beans. Give us that sweet bean juice. Dad's got his truck parked in here out of the storm. I better get this cleaned up before he comes back because I may get fired. If any of you have any job openings available, let me know. Look at that. It's like nothing ever happened. The things I will do for you all. If you haven't liked the video at this point, come on, throw a dog a bone. For the record, this is not water from the rain. This is sweat from being outside earlier. That is how warm and humid it's been today. Okay, Mother Nature, that's enough. Looks like we're starting to get some clear skies over there. This may have been the perfect $1 million rain. Survey says 0.4 of an inch. Didn't rain as much as I thought it did. Looks like the combination of the wind and some heavy rain laid our beans over a little bit. It looks like much more of a problem than it actually is. If your cornfield looked like that, I'd be kind of concerned. By midday tomorrow, if not by tomorrow morning, these things will have stood back up and you won't be able to tell at all that they were laid over. It does let you get a pretty good view of the pods out here. I can definitely see some sporadic sudden death syndrome. There's some there, there's some there. So it's kind of hit or miss across the field. We really may need to consider adding an SDS protection product to our seeds next year. We'll cross that bridge when it comes though. I think that's more than enough farming for one day. If you made it this far in the video, I really appreciate you. Sorry if I utilized a little clickbait to get you here. Sometimes gotta trick people into learning. If you don't already have channel notifications turned on, make sure you hit that button. That way you'll never miss a new video. Follow us on Instagram. I'm going to be dropping some merch soon, so keep your eyes and ears open for that. Thank you all for tuning in. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and comment down below if you have any questions. You know I love to talk about farming. Have a great day, everyone. Peace!